What is the biggest fail date you have ever had? Story 1. My biggest dating fail was when I met a girl one night at a party hosted by an acquaintance. She was attractive, outgoing, and fun to be around. After spending the night getting to know her, I was completely infatuated and decided to ask her out. She said, sure. For our date, she chose the location. She drove me to a huge bridge outside the Loop in Chicago, and I was a bit confused. I asked her what we were doing, and she just said, wait. So I waited in silence for about a minute until she suddenly grabbed my hand, squeezing it harder than I could have ever expected, then started screaming and crying, saying she wanted to give up on life. I panicked and tried to comfort her, but she just snapped at me, saying I was a terrible person for not realizing she was depressed sooner. Then before I could say anything else, she ran back to her car and drove off, leaving me stranded 3 miles from my apartment. Story 2. Last year, I decided to text a girl I had a class with the previous term to try and set up a date. She responded with something like, sure, I was hoping I'd hear from you again. She mentioned she was a good bowler, so we agreed on bowling, and the date was set for the following week. When I arrived, she was sitting on the railing outside the bowling alley waiting. As I got out of my car and smiled at her, she said, oh, hey, I wasn't expecting to see you here. That immediately felt off, but I couldn't think of a good response. So I just played along and acted as if I wasn't expecting to see her either. I asked if I should go inside and set up a lane for us, and she replied, yeah, sure, just hold on a bit. I asked another friend to meet me here. When I asked who, she told me it was a friend who happened to have the same first name as me. I went inside, handed over some passes for free games, put on my bowling shoes, and entered 3 names into the system. I waited about 10 minutes before I got a text from her saying, where are you? I really don't want to be stuck here with this guy I used to have class with. So my instincts were right. She hadn't actually planned to meet me. But since I had free bowling passes that were about to expire, I wasn't about to waste them. I texted back, sorry, family emergency, I can't make it. A minute later, she walked inside and found me at my lane. When I asked about her other friend, she said he wasn't coming. Then when I asked if she was ready to start bowling, she casually said, I'll just watch. I don't really like to bowl. I only came to watch my other friend. Supposedly, he's a really good bowler. At that point, I just told her, well, if you're not going to bowl, there's not much of a point in staying. I was just going to practice for a match anyway. We said our goodbyes and I never heard from her again. Story 3. A few years ago, I met a guy at a bar who was born on the exact same day as me. That seemed like a fun coincidence, so when he asked me out, I said yes. He told me to dress up nicely because we were attending an art gallery opening. I got all dolled up, and when he arrived to pick me up, he was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. Okay, maybe I had misunderstood the dress code. When we got there, I realized it was an art gallery, but barely. It was set up in a warehouse in the middle of nowhere. Some of his friends were there, but he didn't introduce me to them. Instead, he spent the entire evening chatting with them and completely ignoring me. Meanwhile, I was dressed to the nines and everyone else was in jeans. After we left, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I figured, whatever, at least I'll get a free meal out of this disaster of a date. We went to a nice pizza place and ordered a pizza. As I reached for a second slice, he looked at me and said, wow, a second slice? Really? Geez, you eat like a house. So I ate the rest of the pizza. Story 4. In high school, I went on a date with a guy from another town who attended an alternative high school. Well, sort of a date. He met me at Boomers, a place similar to Dave & Buster's with outdoor go-karts and an indoor arcade, to hang out with some mutual friends. The date started with him making out with one of my male friends up against a pinball machine and ended with my mom driving him to his grandparents' house. When we got there, he insisted we come inside to see his pet iguana. That's when things got really weird. His grandmother kept telling my mom how soft her skin was and repeatedly tried to touch her, while his grandfather just sat in the corner, facing the wall. I had never been more confused in my life. I didn't call him again, despite receiving multiple calls from him. Then a few weeks later, I got a string of instant messages from him saying he was going to overdose on pills because he was in love with me. Not wanting to take any chances, I called 911 and messaged him to let him know. The next day he messaged me again, saying a bunch of nonsense about how I had saved his life and that he was forever in my debt. After that, about once a week, I would come home from school to find a bouquet of roses on my doorstep. Then one day I came home to find his grandfather's car in the driveway. His grandfather got out and told me, "You should just date my grandson already." Then without skipping a beat, he added, "And by the way, you were a terrible person for calling 911. You should have just come over to check on him." That was bad enough. But then he admitted that he had been sitting right behind his grandson at the computer the entire time, telling him what to type. He also casually mentioned that he had been the one leaving the roses on my doorstep. I have never wanted to disappear so badly in my entire life. Story 5. Okay, this is long, but I want to paint the full picture here. My first date after ending a long-term relationship was with a guy I met on OkCupid. He seemed intelligent and sweet, so I agreed to go to a movie and then grab dinner with him. When I arrived at the theater, I looked around for the person I had seen in his profile pictures. Instead, I was quickly intercepted by a guy who was easily over 350 pounds. You guessed it. It was him. He was wearing a food-stained t-shirt with crumbs still around the collar. The shirt was too small and too short to cover his stomach, which was spilling out over a pair of shorts that were hanging too low on his hips. His backside was visible even while he was standing up straight, and he made no effort to fix it. I pride myself on not judging people based on their appearance, especially since I'm not exactly petite myself, but I do believe in basic hygiene. And this guy did not believe in basic hygiene. Still, trying to be polite, I smiled and walked into the theater with him. He took up 2 seats. Despite the fact that his popcorn, and soon his fingers, were drenched in butter, he clearly wanted to hold my hand. I kept mine firmly out of reach. After the movie, we crossed the parking lot to a Denny's. He ordered 2 entrees for himself, along with an appetizer of fried cheese, most of which ended up dribbling onto his already stained shirt. The entire time he kept one hand stretched across the table, waiting for me to hold it. Still trying my hardest not to be judgmental, I focused on conversation. He was actually fairly well-spoken, until the topic of social equality came up. That's when he completely destroyed any last chance he had at making a good impression. He leaned back in his seat and said, "People can do whatever they want in their own homes, but if they ever step foot on my property, I'm going to deal with them real quick." At that point, I knew I had to end the night. I drove him back to his car, which was parked across the large lot, and waited for him to get out. But he didn't. He just sat there grinning, saying, "I had a great time tonight." I told him I had to be up early the next morning and needed to go. He ignored that and kept dropping not-so-subtle hints, obviously hoping for an invitation back to my place. We sat there in awkward silence for about 5 minutes before I finally said, as firmly as I could, "Look, this was fun, but I really do have to go. Take care." After a few more seconds of hopeful hesitation, he finally got out of the car. The moment he did, my car practically lifted from the loss of weight, and I sped out of the parking lot. I thought that was the end of it. Then on my drive home, he called me. I ignored it. Half an hour later, he called again, ignored. Then I got an instant message. "I can already tell that I'm in love with you. I want to be exclusive. I don't want you seeing any other guys." Frustrated, I replied, "Look, this isn't going anywhere for me. I just got out of a relationship and am not ready to commit to anyone. Besides, I think we'd be better off as friends." Not that I actually wanted to be his friend, but I didn't want to be too harsh. His response, "I can't just be friends with you. I'll always love you and want more." I replied, "Sorry." Then he asked, "Can you at least promise not to date anyone else until you're ready for a relationship again?" I immediately shut that down. Absolutely not. That's not something I'd promise anyone. His response? "Then I can't ever see or speak to you again because it'll hurt too much." And then he logged off. I thought I was free. I was not free. For the next several weeks, he called, texted, and messaged me constantly, professing his love, begging for another date, and even hinting that he was trying to find out where I worked so he could show up. I blocked him on everything. So he created a new OkCupid account just to get around my block and send me more messages. I blocked that account too. Eventually, the messages stopped. But honestly, after all that, I was done with dating for a long, long time. Story 6. About 5 or 6 years ago, I met a girl who came into my workplace. We talked for a bit and really seemed to hit it off. She even asked me if I wanted to go out for dinner sometime, offering to pick me up and everything. That weekend, we went to a restaurant on the other side of town. She was really interesting, and I found myself listening more than talking. I kept asking her questions about all the things she was passionate about. By the time we finished eating, I told her I'd cover the bill since she had driven us there. I had just handed my debit card to the waiter when, out of nowhere, I blacked out. Now, this has only happened 2 other times in my life, so it's not a common thing. But when I woke up, I was surrounded by people. Some were holding my arms and legs, looking scared. Someone had already called an ambulance. I call it my down feeling, the mood I get after a seizure. It's hard to explain, but everything feels different. Disoriented, I got to my feet and started looking around the restaurant for her. But she was gone. At first, I thought maybe she had run to get help, so I made the EMS workers wait as long as I could. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. I didn't get out of the hospital until 1 a.m. With no public transportation in my town, I had no choice but to walk 7 miles home. She never contacted me again. Story 7. I was about 18, working in the city, New York, at my father's printing shop. A few days earlier, I had met this guy on a bus while heading upstate to visit a friend. One day, I told my father I was leaving work early to meet up with a friend and that I'd just take the train home later. I met up with the guy from the bus, and almost immediately he started acting weird. Think Pepe Le Pew, all touchy-feely, overly affectionate, way too close for comfort. On the subway, he kept trying to hug me, squeeze me, hold me. Then he pulled out a disposable camera and asked if he could take my picture, so he could tell people I was his girlfriend. I, of course, said no. But back then, I was a major people pleaser, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. So I didn't end the date. Even though I desperately wanted to get away, it only got worse. We were walking down some random street when suddenly some woman stormed up to me, furious, getting right in my face. Turns out she was his actual girlfriend, and somehow in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, we had just happened to walk past her while she was out with friends. I took one look at her and said, "Get out of my face." I had no idea he had a girlfriend. Honestly, I was relieved she had shown up. I wanted nothing to do with this guy. He, of course, started following me, but I turned around and said, "Dude, you really don't want to do that. Trust me." At that point, I was done. Since my train wasn't for a while, I decided to just go back to my father's office to wait. That's when I walked in and found him cheating on my mom with the woman he had hired to help with the filing. Story 8. Not as mortifying as some others I've read, but definitely my worst date. It was a first date with a guy I met online. We had some nice conversations leading up to it and decided to meet for sushi one night. The evening started off great. I was really enjoying myself. Then about half an hour into the date, his phone started blowing up with texts and calls. He claimed it was his dad. Being a little naive at the time, I just shrugged it off. But the messages kept coming. He never put his phone on silent and checked every single text. Finally, he told me his dad wanted to go work out with him. At that point, I knew exactly what was going on. "Look," I told him, "if you're not into me, that's fine. But at least have the guts to tell me instead of relying on your friend to bail you out." "Actually," he said, standing up, "it's a booty call. Thanks for dinner." And he just walked out. I sat there mortified, while other diners gave me sympathetic glances. When the server brought the check over, she leaned down and whispered, "I heard what happened." I took that guy's order off. "So you're only paying for what you ate?" That's when I started crying, right there in the middle of the restaurant. I left her a massive tip for her kindness and spent the rest of the night drowning my sorrows in wine, Ben and Jerry's, and Love Actually. Story 9. I was at a party once when a girl approached me. She wanted to set up a double date, me and my buddy with her and her friend. My friend and I agreed, even though his date wasn't exactly his type, but he was willing to take one for the team. On the day of the date, her friend canceled, which I suspected meant this was just a setup for me and her in the first place. No big deal. We went to a movie, and afterwards she invited me back to her dorm to hang out with her roommates. The date was going well, so I agreed. It wasn't unusual for college students to do that. She was about 22, and I was 20 at the time. We hung out for a while with her roommates, and then they decided to go out. I offered to leave as well, but she told me to stay a little longer. So, we put on another movie. At some point, I leaned in to kiss her. She kissed me back, and for a minute or so, everything seemed fine. Then, without warning, she suddenly pulled away, got really agitated, and started asking where this was going. Before I could even answer, she began crying. For the next hour, she went on an emotional spiral, talking about how nothing in her life was right, how she was convinced all men were going to hurt her, and how she just knew she was making a mistake. At that point, I knew this was over, and I just needed an exit strategy. But curiosity got the better of me. I started asking questions, trying to understand. As it turned out, I was only the second person she had ever kissed. She told me she was a virgin because her mother had been extremely overbearing, never letting her date, and constantly warning her that all men were dangerous. Her mom had convinced her that any guy she got close to would eventually hurt her and leave her in a dumpster. Now, because I had kissed her, she believed we had to sleep together. But first, she wanted to call my parents and make sure I wasn't a serial killer. She also wanted to run a background check on me and see my grades. Then the conversation swung back to S. She said she wanted to, but was scared because she didn't know what to do. At that point, I stopped her. I told her I had been in relationships before, and that she would probably be better off finding someone with a little less experience, someone who could take things at her pace. I assured her that I wasn't interested in rushing anything, and that we didn't have to do anything just because we had kissed. She cried again, but ultimately agreed that it wasn't the right time. I left, chalking it up to a weird, unfortunate night. Now keep in mind, all she had was my name and phone number. Maybe my friend's number too. The next morning around 7 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I didn't live on campus. I lived way off campus with roommates. It was her. She had somehow found out where I lived. She was standing at my doorstep, holding flowers and a card. She was still crying. She apologized for everything and asked me to wait until after she left to read the card. I agreed. She walked away tearfully, and I went back inside. The card said, paraphrased, "I really like you. I know I probably scared you away, but if you ever want to give this a shot, please call me." For a brief moment, I thought, well, maybe someday. Then, boom! An intensely loud pounding on the front door. I opened it. She was back. This time she was screaming and in tears, furious that I hadn't immediately read the note and chased after her. At this point, my WTF meter was off the charts. I calmly told her I needed time to think, especially since she had just started trying to break down my door. She collapsed on the floor, sobbing. I waited about 10 minutes for her to stop crying. She eventually agreed to leave. I closed the door and sat down, trying to process everything. 30 seconds later, the pounding started again. At this point, I was done. I explained the situation to my roommates, and none of us answered the door. For the next hour, she pounded on the door, screamed, cried, and hurled insults. I was just about to call the police when she finally left. The next morning, it happened again. This time, she brought an even bigger bouquet. There was less screaming and more pitiful crying, but it still lasted a good 15 minutes. That is, until I threatened to call the police. At that point, she called me a limp banana mother and ran off. I only saw her one more time, about 5 years later. She greeted me with a friendly hi, and then casually said she was really glad we hadn't dated because she had a new boyfriend now, and knew I would never change my mind about her. The guy was standing right next to her. She was still a total knockout, but, well, her new boyfriend looked like Quasimodo. Story 10. Reposting from an older but similar thread. God, yes. The date was arranged by the college newspaper at the school I was attending. I had never met nor seen the person I would be courting that night. I was only told that all expenses would be paid. I was a college student. How could I turn down free food? We met up at a local Greek restaurant while being followed by a film crew. She was great, charming, cute, funny, and able to hold her own in a conversation. However, much like that exact Lego piece you desperately need in a tub full of bricks, her crazy was well hidden. After the meal, we went for a long walk on the beach. A few minutes in, she leaned in close and whispered, "Let's ditch the film crew." When an attractive girl asks you to find a way to get to a secluded place, logic is often overtaken by hormones. The second they turned their heads, we made a dash for it. We found a lifeguard tower that wasn't in use and made our way up the ramp. It was perfectly secluded, with the tactical advantage of allowing us to see if anyone was approaching. I leaned in for a kiss, assuming that was what she wanted. She put a hand on my chest and held me back. "Wait," she said. She was excited and she made no effort to hide it. "Do you want to see my scars?" No big deal. I'd had creepier things said to me before, and I figured it was just an excuse to eventually get us undressed. I was game. Sure. She took off her shirt, not her bra. But that didn't matter because I was no longer focused on that. Across her stomach were deep, jagged scars that covered her abdomen like corduroy. Scars so deep they didn't just change the tone of her skin, but altered the very shape of it, distorting how it flowed. Want to give me one? I, er, what? What are these from? Memories. Give me one. She pulled out a hunting knife from her purse. The crazy was no longer hidden. She actually wanted me to cut her. I've done it before. We'll just say I fell while we were climbing the lifeguard tower. I I think the film crew found us. They were a good 50 yards away, oblivious to the fact that we were even there. I stood up and waved, pretending to blush as if we'd been caught doing something mischievous, while in reality, a half-naked girl with a knife was crouched below me. She was not pleased, and she still had the knife. I was mentally saying goodbye to my currently not stabbed body, praying it would stay that way. But the cameras were rolling. She knew she had to play nice. Otherwise, her little secret would be exposed to the world. She hid the knife, stood up, and giggled. The date continued. We played laser tag. I elected not to give her my number at the end of the night. Story 11. I met a girl online. She seemed reasonably attractive and fairly easygoing, so I figured, hey, why not? We met at a local coffee shop and chatted for a few minutes before a mutual acquaintance of ours happened to show up out of nowhere and joined our conversation. Turns out they were both in AA together. I then proceeded to learn all about her long and complicated history of alcohol abuse and the real reason she wanted to date. Her exact words were, "I'm trying to replace my boyfriend who died this summer." So, the guy decided to invite himself along for our date, neither of them bothering to ask if that was okay with me. We ended up driving to a bar, a fantastic choice for a couple of recovering alcoholics, and the entire time, they were playing the absolute worst music I could imagine on the radio. I sat in the back seat, suffering through it while they chatted, thinking to myself, dear God, how can I get out of this? We arrived at the bar, where they proceeded to drink coffee and play air hockey, while I brainstormed an escape plan. I ended up faking a phone call from a friend, pretending she was in the hospital and that I had to leave. The girl immediately freaked out, accusing me of bailing on her in the middle of our date. I just stared at her for a second, blinked, and walked away. Story 12. The summer after graduating from high school, I went on a date with a girl I had been friends with for a while. We decided to go to a fair a few towns over. We walked around, ate some fried food, and went on a couple of rides. Things were going great, and we shared a lot of laughs. Then we got on a ride similar to a zipper or a salt and pepper shaker. Lots of spinning, flipping upside down, and sudden drops. About halfway through, the funnel cake I had eaten earlier decided it did not want to remain in my stomach. With her sitting next to me, I started throwing up, and then we flipped upside down, and my own vomit came right back at my face. Thankfully, I had enough sense to keep most of it away from her. She emerged from the ride completely puke-free. I, however, did not. We have now been together for over 6 years, are currently engaged, and will be getting married next summer. Story 13. First date. Stunning ice blue eyes, curly blonde hair, and a thick German accent. She was very skinny but wearing baggy clothes, so I didn't think much of it. Germans have their own fashion sense, right? The date went great. We had dinner, during which she kept going to the bathroom. Then we had ice cream, and again, she kept excusing herself to the restroom. We went for a walk, held hands, and eventually checked into a matrimonial suite at a youth hostel. We were making out when she suddenly stood up, backed away from me, and in her thick accent asked, "Do you like that, you see?" Then she took off her clothes. That's when I realized she had an eating disorder. She was wildly underweight, so much so that it was alarming. She started begging me to sleep with her, and I thought to myself, wow, this is really a pickle. I was no longer attracted to her at all, but I didn't want to be cruel. She clearly had some serious body image issues. So I tried to navigate the situation carefully, kissing her, touching her, doing my best to be kind while not rejecting her outright. Then she asked me to go further. But here's the craziest part. Her body was completely unresponsive, completely dry, so tight that I couldn't even get a single finger in. I hesitated and asked, "How do you even fit tampons in?" She casually replied, "Oh, I haven't had a period in almost a year." Somehow, an hour later, we were both fully clothed again, holding hands, and eventually fell asleep on the bed. I think I handled it gently. We kept in touch through emails for a while afterward, and she always seemed to have positive feelings toward me. Story 14. I had my first ever date in 9th grade, and I had it all planned out with a girl I really liked. When I ran through the plan with my friends, they reminded me how socially awkward I was and warned that if I couldn't carry a conversation, there wouldn't be a second date. So, being the smooth guy that I am, I decided to prepare by Googling how to talk to a girl and conversation starters about an hour before the date. The only problem? I was too nervous to memorize them, so I wrote them down on my palm for future reference. She picked a sushi place for dinner. Of course, I told her I love sushi, to make myself seem sophisticated and worldly. Truth was, I'd never had it before. Turns out, that little green substance they put on the side of the sushi roll, yeah, that's not guacamole. It's wasabi, a horrific blend of horseradish, fire, and pure suffering. Not knowing this, I ate the entire chunk in one bite. Within seconds, my sinuses were on fire, my eyes were watering, and I was practically sobbing at the table. Mucus was streaming from my nose. Panicked, I decided to distract her with a tactical conversation starter. I discreetly glanced at my palm, only to realize that my nervous, sweaty hands had completely smudged the ink. But I didn't notice before wiping my wasabi-induced snot storm off my face. So now I was sitting across from her, face covered in a horrifying mix of ink and mucus, while she just stared at me, probably wondering what kind of disaster she had agreed to go out with. I caught my reflection in the window, and between the pain and the sheer humiliation, I just started crying. We had to call my mom to pick us up early. Shut up, I was in ninth grade. The car ride home was silent, except for the oldies station my mom had playing. She let me use her sweater to wipe my face off. The girl and I later became friends in high school and still laugh about it to this day. To this day, she still believes I was only crying from the wasabi. Story 15. I was working as roving security at a science fiction convention in the late 1980s. I was paired up with a cute young woman we'll call Alice. She seemed to have potential. Smart, witty, funny, and she laughed at my jokes. It was obvious we were hitting it off. The only thing that concerned me was that she looked a bit young, but since security staff had to be over 18 and IDs were checked, I figured it was fine. Near the end of our shift, we decided to have dinner together. "I'll grab my purse back at my room and meet you in the lobby," she said. "Actually, I don't have anywhere else to go. Mind if I just tag along?" I asked. "Sure," she said with a bright smile. My heart skipped a beat. On the way to her room, we kept talking, just as we had been doing all shift. She was being flirtatious, playing with her hair, biting her lower lip when we made eye contact. We were both comfortably dorky together. When we reached her room, she said, "I'll be right back," and unlocked the door. What neither of us expected was what was waiting inside. Her roommates had clearly not been expecting her either, and it quickly became apparent that Alice had no idea her roommates were into group activities. To be fair, it looked like they were just getting started. People were undressing, a huge tarp was laid out, there were scented oils, and a few women were, let's just say, preparing the men. Before anyone imagines some fantasy scenario, let me remind you, this was a science fiction convention. Most of the people in that room were over 180 pounds, and the few who were skinny had a kind of unsettling, unhealthy thinness. Imagine cottage cheese and cauliflower mixed with pretzel sticks. But hey, to each their own. Everyone there was a consenting adult. I looked at Alice, wondering if this was something she was into. The sheer horror on her face told me everything I needed to know. Her jaw dropped. She stammered, turned pale, and nearly fainted. "Oh, oh my God, no, 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 no. Oh my God, oh my God, oh God." She turned to me, her eyes wide with shock. "You didn't think I would never be involved in this." "Oh God." One of the women at the door, also looking a little embarrassed, wrapped herself in a towel and said, "Oh, Alice, I didn't know you'd be back tonight. We were going to be done by 9 and..." "Oh no, oh dear." She quickly went to comfort Alice, who was now shaking and sobbing in shock. Then the woman gently pulled Alice inside and closed the door in my face. I just stood there wondering what the hell had just happened. After a few minutes, I knocked on the door. I heard Alice sobbing even louder. The woman opened it slightly and said, "Punk? Look, Alice is a little out of sorts. Let us calm her down, and she'll meet you in the lobby." About an hour later, the woman found me. "Look, Punk, I am so sorry. Alice is my niece, and she was traveling with us. She had no idea this was going to happen, and she wanted you to know she had no intention of bringing you into our group. She's 19, just a little naive, and we didn't expect her to return so early. That's on me. She decided to drive home. She doesn't approve of our, lifestyle, And honestly, it's probably for the best. I know her mother is going to have a fit, but I just wanted to say sorry about all this. Alice really liked you, but I think we embarrassed her so badly that she can't face you. I said I understood. I gave her my phone number to pass along to Alice. Never heard from her again. Story 16. Met a guy on the bus. He asked me out, and while I was apprehensive, I figured I should keep an open mind. We went to a bar for our first date. To keep things casual, I met him there and bought my own drink before he arrived. When he finally showed up, he immediately asked me to pay for his drink because apparently he hadn't brought any money, strike one. Then he kept insisting we leave the bar, but didn't have any plans for where we should go. I suggested a walk, strike two. During the walk, he would not let me talk. Every time I tried, he forcibly kissed me or groped me. Even when I told him no, strike three. At the end of the date, I accidentally stepped on a roadkill possum, and you know what? That was less disgusting than Grabby McHandsy shoving his tongue down my throat. Story 17. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship and was being encouraged to get back into the dating scene instead of sitting around sulking, so I decided to join OkCupid. I messaged a few girls on my first night, then largely ignored the app for a few weeks until one night I got a response. I checked out the girl's pictures and found it a little odd that she only had photos of her face taken at angles that seemed to intentionally avoid showing the rest of her. Still, we started talking, and before long, I actually enjoyed our conversations. Then, out of the blue one night, she proclaimed, "We must meet right now to figure this out because I think I love you." So, I agreed to meet her at Starbucks. While waiting, I saw an incredibly large girl approach and introduce herself. I tried to remain calm and collected. We bought drinks and started talking, and honestly, she was pretty interesting. Except that every 2 seconds, she kept asking, "So do you like the way I look? Can you see this happening?" The date continued into dinner, where she ordered more food than I could ever consume in one sitting, and I'm not a small guy, and she proceeded to eat it all while talking to me, still asking every few moments if I liked what I saw. I paid for dinner and was about to politely tell her it wasn't going to work when she suddenly tried to ambush me with a kiss in the parking lot. At that moment, I somehow gained the speed of Neo from the Matrix and managed to hug her while simultaneously avoiding the kiss. She asked me one final time if I liked what I saw, and I replied, "I wouldn't have minded it so much if you hadn't taken a magnifying glass to your insecurities." In a final act of defiance, she pulled out a candy bar from her purse and said, "I'm happy with how I look, and you would have gotten lucky tonight." And honestly, more power to her. Just don't ask me the same question every 2 seconds. Story 18. My good friend Vicky and her husband Will, a surgeon, are always trying to set me up. Always. I usually turn down their offers, but they really talked up this guy, Ben. He seemed like a great catch. Smart, a doctor, and even had a bigger Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collection than I did. He took me to a pretty nice place for dinner. I was a little nervous, but nothing felt off until he spilled his drink. On purpose, I saw him do it. I was about to ask him what was going on when he suddenly started talking like a baby. "Oopsie, I spilled Emily drink. I'm a wad boy." I stared at him in disbelief and asked, "Ben, are you okay?" But he kept going, still using baby talk, looking all coy, until he, I am not making this up, actually asked me if Mommy wanted to spank her bad boy. I was out of there. I got up from the table and walked out. He ran after me, talking normally, apologizing. I had to wait at coat check, so I reluctantly accepted his apology and assured him I wouldn't tell Vicky and Will about his kink. Then as he hugged me, the hug lasted just a little too long. I pushed him away and, well, there's no polite way to say this. He definitely had an accident in his pants. Right against my leg, I have no proof, but yeah, he did, I ran. So, yeah, worst date ever. Story 19. This didn't happen to me, but you have to hear it. My friend Jay is the sweetest, nicest guy on earth. Period. He's polite, positive, a talented musician, just an all-around great person. But Jay doesn't have much luck with women. He blames it on his weight, his age, and the fact that he still lives with his mom. So in 2007, when he got a message from a very good-looking woman on MySpace, he was hesitant to even reply. After consulting with our friend group, he figured, why not? Even if it's a scam, at least I'll be talking to the picture of a good-looking woman. Weeks went by, and he kept us updated. Their conversations progressed to daily instant messaging, then phone calls, then webcam chats. Jay was thrilled with how things were going. After 2 months, he told us he was going to North Carolina to meet her. The first trip was canceled by her. A second was rescheduled but never happened. Jay was crushed. Then one day he got a call from her. She apologized for the lack of communication, citing family problems. And Jay, being the nicest guy I know, immediately forgave her. A third trip was planned, and we spent an entire month trying to convince him not to go. He already had doubts, but he was determined. The day finally came. We said our goodbyes and off he went. He returned that same night, an absolute wreck. He told us what happened. He had met her. She was real and stunningly beautiful. According to him, they hit it off right away. She seemed interested in everything he was into. Then she told him she had something to confess. She was a psychology student studying the impact of social media on dating. She had led him on the whole time. Worse, she had convinced him to come by claiming she was in an abusive relationship. He was devastated. He spent days in tears, cursing himself for being so gullible. Personally, I don't think this was some study. I think she was just a heartless woman who preyed on one of the last truly good guys out there. That's a pretty bad date, if you ask me. Story 20. So it was our second date, and she insisted on driving this time. I had no problem with that. We planned to do the classic dinner and a movie. She picked me up at 5, and we headed to Cheeseburger in Paradise. We ate, had a couple of beers, and left. With over an hour before the movie, we decided to take a walk at a nearby park. The weather was perfect. Birds singing, gentle breeze, not too hot. I had no idea the disaster that was coming. As we walked, making small talk, I suddenly felt that sensation. You know the one, the gut-wrenching feeling like an angry badger is clawing its way out of your intestines. I needed a bathroom. I kept quiet, trying to spot a public restroom, but there were none. The feeling subsided a bit, so I decided the best plan was to get back to her car and head to the theater, where I knew there would be restrooms. We got in the car. Now I should mention, this girl was timid. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and even drove 5 miles under the speed limit. As we pulled out of the park, the urge returned. Worse, we made it 3/4 of a mile when we hit a red light. And waited, and waited. My vision tunneled. Move, damn it! Finally, the light turned green, but she crawled forward at a snail's pace. Then, like Thor himself struck my colon, there was no holding back. White-knuckling the passenger door, I lost all control. I barely remember running to the theater bathroom, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. The smell, the horror, the witnesses. While in the restroom, I texted her. Just go home. She wanted to stay. No, go home. Amazingly, she later said she didn't care and still wanted to date. But somehow, I wasn't comfortable dating someone totally okay with me destroying her car. Later, I was diagnosed with IBS. It gave me social anxiety for a while. But now, I just laugh about it. I mean, I've already in a date's car. What's the worst that could happen next? Story 21. I debated whether to tell this story, but here goes. This was my second date with a girl I actually really liked. We got along great, liked the same music. It was going well. The date itself started off normal. We went to dinner, saw a movie, just the usual fun stuff. She lived about 20 minutes away in a more rural area, so on the drive back we were talking and listening to music. I was starting to really like her. And then it happened, out of nowhere, a baby deer, a literal Bambi, jumped right in front of my SUV while I was going 60 miles per hour. The deer exploded on impact. My car was wrecked. The date fell into complete awkward silence. I turned to her, still processing what had just happened. And then she looked at me and, I kid you not, screamed, "What the hell is your problem? Blah, blah, blah. I'm a PETA member, blah." Then she punched me right in the face. After that, she jumped out of the car and took off running in the other direction. I just sat there for 30 minutes, staring ahead, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Screw everything about being a teenager. Story 22. When I was 25, I moved back to my college town to finish school. The very first night back, I met a girl at a friend's house, and we hit it off right away. That night, we even ended up sharing a sleeping bag. No, nothing happened. Before we passed out, I asked her if she wanted to go on a date sometime, and she said yes. A few days later, I called her up and suggested we go bowling and grab some drinks. She said it sounded like fun. So the next day, I showed up at the bowling alley, expecting a nice one-on-one date. Instead, I found her, along with about 10 mutual friends. I figured, okay, maybe she just feels more comfortable with friends around. No big deal. Some of them even joked about my date, which should have been my first red flag. After bowling, we all headed back to the same house where we had met the week before. I was outside having a beer when I realized I hadn't seen her in a while, so I went inside to look for her. I glanced out the front door and saw her riding on my good friend's back as they walked toward his house. Confused, I just blurted out, "Sheena, what the heff?" She jumped off his back, ran up to me drunkenly and said, "Sorry, I'm leaving," before immediately running back to him and climbing back on his damn back. They went to his house, they hooked up, they ended up dating for over 2 years. And the worst part? I hated her for it, but I still had to put up with her. Oh, and she told everyone I knew that I was in love with her and just couldn't get over her. I hated that girl. Story 23. About 10 years ago, I met a girl online, on Yahoo of all places. We exchanged pictures. Everything looked good. We started chatting about random stuff, and at some point, she claimed she was unbeatable at Scrabble. I knew she was baiting me for a date, so I played along and challenged her to a game. She invited me over to her place. I arrived and immediately realized I had been catfished. She was at least 100 pounds heavier than in her pictures. And her house? Yeah, it wasn't a house. It was a trailer in a trailer park. I walked inside, and there was no table to play Scrabble on, so we played on the floor. She didn't even have any drinks to offer me except a bottle of Sam's Club water. I absolutely obliterated her at Scrabble. Twice then, she begged me to stay and sleep with her. I did not. Story 24. I don't even know if this counts as a real date. It was that bad. We were both English majors in college, and I had recently broken up with my high school boyfriend. A guy I knew from class asked me out for coffee and to study. Since we had been friends before, it didn't seem weird to hang out. At first it was fine. We got coffee and he started acting like it was actually a date, buying my drink, trying to hold my arm while walking. But that wasn't too surprising. He was an old school gentleman type, sweater vests, picking flowers for girls, the whole thing. Then the part that made it a fail date happened. We sat down with our drinks and he slyly slid a manuscript across the table. He told me he had written it for me but had been too shy to give it to me while I was dating my ex. Then he asked if I could edit it. I agreed and was about to start reading when he suddenly grabbed my hand. He launched into a rant about how much of a jerk he thought my ex was, how I was better off without him, blah, blah, blah. I awkwardly pulled my hand away, thanked him, and finally started reading. And that's when I realized the entire story was a revenge fantasy. It was about a boy who was madly in love with a girl. The girl had a jerk boyfriend. So the hero of the story stalked the boyfriend and eventually murdered him. And the murder scene? It was insanely detailed. Then out of pure rage, the story's hero killed the girl too, because she hadn't liked him all along. I don't even remember how I reacted. I just sat there in pure shock and terror. We never talked again after that. Eventually, we became friends again in senior year, but I never felt comfortable around him. I made sure I was never alone with him. Story 25. So I had been talking to this amazing girl from work, and things were going really well. We got along great, and we had made plans to grab dinner after work on Friday. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, on Friday, about 2 hours before we were supposed to meet up, I got a text from her saying, there's probably something I should tell you. Workmate's name invited himself along, and he's refusing to take the hint. Just my luck. This guy was notorious for third-wheeling whenever a girl he liked was involved. And the thing was, he liked every girl. It was almost like he had a radar for ruining dates. I decided to go anyway, only to find him already waiting with her. She was clearly ignoring him, but he just wouldn't take the hint. So, I pulled him aside and explained that we had planned for it to be just the two of us that evening. His response? Well, plans change sometimes. So what are we up to? Needless to say, the date was a complete disaster thanks to his unwelcome presence. We never bothered to arrange a second one. Funny enough, he tried to do the same thing when I was going on a date with my now girlfriend. Turns out all I had to do was tell him, "You need to leave now." And he actually backed off, at least for a while. He still texts and calls my girlfriend, trying to meet up. Story 26. I was invited to a comedy show at our university by this guy. Unfortunately, he got the time wrong, and we ended up showing up an hour after it had already ended. Trying to salvage the situation, I invited him to a party that some of my friends in a fraternity were hosting. When we arrived, I quickly realized that he had been rejected from that fraternity 2 years prior. Apparently, there was still some lingering awkward tension between him and about half the people at the party. Luckily, the party got shut down about 15 minutes after we got there. But somehow, in that short time, my date had managed to get extremely drunk. Since it was still pretty early in the night, he invited me back to his room to watch a movie. The entire time, he kept saying every punchline before it happened, completely ruining every joke. About halfway through the movie, he casually slipped his hand under my shirt and just sat there, holding my chest. He didn't try to kiss me, didn't say anything, just sat there as if this was normal. I finally told him it was weird and he moved his hand. After the movie, he walked me home and kissed me goodnight. It was awful. I told him it wasn't any more awkward than the rest of the date. Unsurprisingly, we never went out again. Story 27. I met a girl at an Oktoberfest party. As you can imagine, there was a lot of beer involved. We ended up talking for hours. One of those deep, interesting conversations that make you think you've really connected with someone. By the end of the night, I got her number and suggested we go out later that week. She thought it was a great idea. Fast forward a few days. I bought a nice bottle of wine and took her to a small acoustic set in a rented indoor Zen garden. Everything was going perfectly. She laughed at all my jokes and we were really hitting it off. At some point, she mentioned her little brother. I asked how old he was and she said he was 5 years older than me. I laughed and asked if she meant figuratively little. Nope. She meant literally little because she was 8 years older than me. She then asked how old I was, and the moment I told her, I could physically see the smile disappear from her face. I tried to shrug it off and keep the conversation going, but her attitude had completely changed. When I asked if she was okay, she suddenly said she needed to go to the washroom. I had a gut feeling she wasn't coming back, but I laughed it off, thinking I was just overreacting. A few minutes later, I got a text saying she had a family emergency and had to leave. I called her out on it saying, well, I hope everything works out. But if this is about the age difference, I get it. No hard feelings. She never replied. Honestly, I thought that was a pretty lousy move. I was still in my early 20s, so I guess that was a big deal for her. But hey, I still had almost an entire bottle of wine left. And the music had just started. So I stayed, drank, and enjoyed the show. Afterward, I ended up meeting some people who thought my story was hilarious. They bought me a few drinks at a bar around the corner. So at least my night didn't go to waste. Story 28. About a year ago, my ex and I broke up after almost 3 years together. A few months later, one of my good guy friends, who wasn't mutual friends with my ex, asked me out. I hadn't been on a first date in years, so even though I was hesitant, I decided to go. This guy had been one of my best friends since we were about 6 or 7. The date went okay. We didn't do anything. No touching, no kissing, nothing. Afterward, he invited me back to his place to record some songs together, since we had been in a band a few years back. It sounded harmless enough, so I agreed. Once we got to his place, I sat down on his couch, and he suddenly told me he loved me. I laughed and said, well, duh, love you too. Then he clarified. He was in love with me, always had been. He started going on and on about marriage, kids, and our future together. I told him I didn't feel that way. That's when something snapped. He lunged at me in what can only be described as a blackout rage. He started choking me, trying to kiss me, and everything started going dark. I kneed him as hard as I could. Cheap shot or not, I was close to passing out. Then I managed to slam him onto the ground and pressed my foot against his throat. He started apologizing. I left immediately and never spoke to him again. Story 29. Back in high school, I went on a date with a girl who had just gotten her driver's license and permission to use her parents' car. She offered to pick me up, which was great. I didn't mind not driving. About a mile from my house, a raccoon ran out into the road. She hit it hard. I felt the impact right under my feet. Her eyes went wide and she stared straight ahead, completely silent, for the next 2 miles. At a stoplight, I decided to break the silence. Poor Ricky, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. Big mistake. She completely lost it, screaming, crying, and even punching me. Then out of nowhere, she pulled over, kicked me out of the car, and sped off down the street. About a block later, she crashed right into a parked car. Being a decent person, I ran to check if she was okay. She wasn't hurt, but when she saw me, she started punching me again. screaming that it was my fault she crashed. At that point, I just walked home and watched some TV. She never spoke to me again. Story 30. I once met a girl online who told me she wanted to pursue a master's degree in biomedical anthropology. I thought, sweet, a smart girl. Plus, I enjoy talking about cultural anthropology. Eventually, she insisted that we talk on the phone. When we did, she barely said a word. I asked about her degree, but she couldn't explain it in any coherent way. I started wondering if she had lied about her academic interests or if she was just really bad at conversation. I told her that I didn't think our conversation was going anywhere. She got defensive and insisted she was fascinating and interesting. Who even says that? I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. We met for dinner. She barely spoke. She barely looked at me. Talking to her felt like trying to pull teeth from a rabid honey badger. I was ready to call it a night. Sure, she was kind of cute, but at this point, I'd rather go read about Tibetan fraternal polyandry than sit through more of this awkward silence. Trying to be honest, I told her, I don't think this is going to work out, but thanks for letting me take you to dinner. She snapped. She raised her voice and yelled, how could you not think I'm interesting? I'm the most interesting person I know. Look at me. I just stood there and blinked. That was, without a doubt, the longest sequence of sentences she had ever strung together. I sighed and said, sorry, I'm just not seeing it. Want to watch Total Recall? Since she was a Philip K. Banana fan, she agreed. So, we watched the movie. Then one thing led to another. At least she wasn't quiet during that. After that, I never called her again. Story 31. I had been talking to a guy online who used to be a monk, which I thought was kind of cool. While chatting, he kept mentioning odd things about his preferences, but I brushed it off as normal. A friend of mine even helped justify it. Why, I have no idea. A few weeks later, I decided to meet him in person. He was attractive, despite having slightly disfigured ears. But as soon as we met, I realized something was off. He had taken a 3-hour bus ride to meet me and brought a huge backpack. The whole time he kept trying to touch me, putting his hand on my leg, telling me to relax. I was incredibly uncomfortable and my knife was in my purse just out of reach. Then he unzipped his backpack and pulled out a giant black rubber object. He started laughing about it. That's when I knew I had to get out. Later I found out this was apparently the reason he had been kicked out of the monastery. I quickly texted my friend to call me and pretend to be my boss, saying I had to leave for an emergency. He did, and thankfully I got out of there. The guy ended up waiting in a nearby park until nightfall. After that, I blocked him, but he kept making new accounts to contact me for months. Story 32. It was my first year of community college when I met a girl on an online dating site. She looked a little different in person, heavier than in her pictures, but she was still cute, and we were both excited for the date. Fast forward through a comedy show and a deep conversation over dinner at an upscale Chinese restaurant, and it was time to drop her off. Things were going great. A second date seemed inevitable. The mood had been set. We sat in the car talking, having one of those, we don't want the night to end moments. Then suddenly we started fooling around. Keep in mind we were still in the car, parked in a mall parking lot. Out of nowhere, a security guard's Jeep flicked on its lights. Since it was nighttime, you could see them from half a mile away. The car was running for heat, and most of our clothing was still intact. But I panicked. Thinking quickly, I did the only logical thing. I threw it into first gear and gunned it. Unfortunately, I had completely underestimated how fogged up the windows had gotten. Just before impact, my pupils dilated as I realized, far too late, that I was about to crash into a concrete barrier, one that, ironically, had a stop sign attached to it. She called her parents to come pick her up. That was their first impression of me. They didn't want her speaking to me again. Story 33. Okay, so this will probably get buried, but I've been waiting to tell this story. At the time, I was working at GameStop, which for some reason I took way too much pride in. One day, a cute blonde came in, browsing the used DVDs. She was trying to decide between Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Season 1, and Angel, Season 1. Being a huge Joss Whedon fan, I offered my opinion, and we started flirting. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask for her number, and to my surprise, she gave it to me. The next day, I called her, and we made plans for dinner. The day of the date, I woke up feeling horrible. I couldn't stop throwing up. Some stomach bug was going around, but I decided to tough it out. When I picked her up, I asked where she wanted to go, and she pointed to a place across the street. It was the dirtiest, most disgusting hole-in-the-wall Mexican restaurant I had ever seen. But I didn't want to be rude, so I went along with it. I ordered my food while she ordered the biggest burrito I had ever seen. Meanwhile, I could barely sit up straight from being so sick. As I struggled, she devoured that burrito like she hadn't eaten in days. Cheese and beans dripping down her face, sour cream falling onto the table. It took everything in me not to vomit. Just when I was about to call it quits, an older woman, mid-50s, and a younger guy, late 20s, walked up and started talking to my date. She introduced them as her mom and stepdad. I introduced myself while trying my hardest to keep my WTF face in check. The age gap was throwing me off, but I kept it together until they decided to join us for dinner. Trying to be polite, I agreed, and my date scooted closer, practically sitting on my lap. For the next 20 minutes, I listened to her mom talk about how they had to move out of their house because it was haunted. I had mentally checked out at this point. I put $20 on the table to cover my date's meal and mine, then excused myself to the restroom just to escape the madness for a minute. When I came back, the $20 was gone, but the bill was still there. I looked around but didn't see it. I started second-guessing myself. Had I actually put the money down? I should have checked my wallet, but I didn't want to flash cash around in that place. So I put another $20 down and handed it directly to the waiter this time, just to be sure. At this point, I just wanted the night to be over. But of course, it wasn't. As we were about to leave, her mom asked her husband for his wallet to pay for their meal. He casually explained that he didn't have it. She then said she didn't bring her purse. Then the two of them slowly turned to me and, much to my disbelief, they asked me to pay for their food. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because their daughter was hot. Maybe because she had been rubbing my thigh for the past 25 minutes. But I paid it, another $40. Finally, I took her home. She begged me to stay and hang out longer, but I needed to get as far away as possible. I waved, smiled, and sped the hell out of that town. But here's the real kicker. Before the date, I had gone to an ATM and taken out exactly $200 in 20s. Knowing I had spent $40 on her parents and $20 on our meal, I expected to have $120 left. So once I was in my car, I checked my wallet and saw only $80. I sat there for a second, replaying everything. Then it hit me. I had put down the first $20. She stole it. At the top of my lungs, I screamed, "I knew it! She took the money!" I was furious for a while, but once I told the story to some friends, I realized how ridiculous and honestly hilarious it was. And the story doesn't even end there. Years later, I ran into that same girl at a party. And of course, the craziness continued. Story 34. While working on a project in Vienna, I hooked up with a Turkish girl at a student bar. She was pretty attractive, not the best at English, but entertaining enough for me to make a move, especially after a few drinks. Since we lived in the same building, we agreed to watch a movie together. It was some Adam Sandler comedy, typical American humor. She didn't laugh, not even once. I asked if she didn't understand the jokes, but she insisted that her English was fine. All right then. The whole thing felt awkward, but after about an hour and a half of this weirdness, she suddenly ripped off her clothes and started going at it like I was a puppet. At one point, she stopped and told me to take off my necklace, something my father gave me before he passed away. I asked why, and she said I looked like a pimp or a drug dealer. I refused and tried to explain the sentimental value, but she wasn't having it. Furious, she stormed out of the apartment, half naked, leaving me well, you get the idea. Next thing I know, she's calling me, saying her husband is in the building and on his way to my apartment to have a word with me. I almost lost it, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, locked everything, and sat there waiting for half an hour, nothing. Then I got a text from her. "Just kidding. My husband is still in Germany. Not a joke, not in my book.